We are live. So good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world, and we are super excited this month of October. Typically, our space month has been November. This year, we moved it, and it allowed us to blow it right up. We've had the most sessions we've ever had in a month ever. By the 31st, it'll be over 65 sessions from around the world with amazing engineers, scientists, researchers, and more. And a great many of those are with astronauts, explorers, engineers, and people working to push the boundaries of space exploration. Right now, we've got 5 classes joining us from across North America. So I'm going to give them a chance to say hi before we dive right in. We've got Miss Praisner's grade 5s in Park Ridge, Illinois. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hey, welcome in. Awesome. We've got Miss Moore's grade 5s in Newmarket in Alabama. Hi, guys. Hey, wow, that was okay. Setting the bar high. We've got Mr. Allen's grade 6s in Brampton, Ontario. Hi, guys. Hey. We've got Miss Saunders grade 5/6s in North Bay, Ontario. Hello. This is we've got a very enthusiastic group today. And then last but not least, we've got Mr. Lavogue's grade 8s in North Palm Beach, Florida, joining us for the 850 millionth time. Hey, perfect. All right. Of course, the reason you guys are all here today is for our speakers. So we are joined live in Los Angeles, beautiful Los Angeles, by Dr. Farah Alibay. And so she is a systems engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, one of the most storied and amazing research facilities in the entire world. Literally has been driving the space industry with amazing research since its inception. And so as a systems engineer, she gets to build and test amazing robots that go to explore other worlds. Most recently in 2018, she's now working on a 2020 project. I don't want to steal her thunder, so I'm going to turn it over to her to blow our minds. And so without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Alibay, and take it away.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. So hi, everyone. I'm Farah. I'm somewhere outside LA, so today I wanted to give you a little bit of my background, where I came from, how I ended up at NASA, and what I do now. But mostly I'm excited to hear about all your questions. This is sort of a great program. When I was your age, I didn't really have access to engineers and scientists. So I'm really excited to be able to share with you and then hopefully answer whatever questions you might have about space or becoming an engineer, or even just how you get to follow the career you want to do. So I have a few cool pictures because you can't work in space without pictures. So I'm going to share those with you now, and then I'll come back on the camera later. So let me just get that started.
Excellent. Let me know when it's all up.
And it should hopefully be up now. Can you see my screen?
Yep, you're excellent.
Okay, so I've been working at JPL, the Jet Propulsion Lab, which is out here in sunny California, for now almost 6 years. And somehow I've only worked on Mars missions since I've joined JPL. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. But first, a little bit about my background. This is a picture of me when I was about 5 years old. I was actually born in Canada. I was born in Montreal. So I'm French speaking. That's my first language. And I grew up in a small town, let's say 45 minutes north of Montreal, called Joliette, for any of you who may have been to Quebec before. And in my town, working in aerospace wasn't really a thing that people did. People didn't really leave our town. No one spoke English, so it was kind of daunting to even think about working at NASA. What does that mean? I heard about NASA because of a movie called Apollo 13. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it's a very realistic movie about the Apollo 13 mission and the things that went wrong. And what I remember from that movie is engineers working together to solve really hard problems. And that was really appealing to me. I liked the idea of working in teams and solving hard problems. How could you not? So I sort of set my sights on working at NASA when I was about 10, which seemed ridiculous at the time. But a few things happened in my life after that helped me get there. So I ended up moving to England when I was a teenager. That's how I learned English. But even then, I remember talking to, once you get to sort of like 10th or 11th grade, you get career advisors and you talk to your career advisors. And I remember I did a little online test and it came up with I should either be an aerospace engineer or a doctor. So I sat down with my career advisor and I was like, well, aerospace engineer, that's kind of cool, right? I can be an astronaut or something one day. And I remember her telling me, she looked at me and she said, well, you see, engineering, that's a male-dominated field. I don't really know if that's something that you should do. Maybe you should consider being a doctor. That's better. That way you can have a family. Well, when people tell me no, I usually do the opposite. But the lesson that I always share that story with people because for me, if I had listened to that person, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. So I decided to follow my guts in that case, and I ended up going to the University of Cambridge, and I did engineering there. And then I went on to do a Ph.D. at MIT. So that picture there is one of the robots I worked on when I was at MIT. Also an aerospace engineer. And then the way I got my foot in the door at NASA is that I actually did internships. So NASA in general and JPL has internships. Every summer we take on about 500 interns. Take about 50 high school students, and then the rest are all college and graduate students. And that's how I got to know JPL. And when I was here, my first internship was back in 2012, and we landed the big Curiosity rover, which is the big rover that's on Mars right now. And I saw that landing live from JPL, and I thought, well, how can you not fall in love with this place? So I ended up finishing my studies and going there. So let me give you a little bit of background of what JPL does. That big rover that you see on the screen, that's the rover that I was talking about that landed on Mars in 2012. But what JPL does is that we explore the solar system. So we don't, unlike the other NASA centers, we don't do human missions. I don't interact with astronauts, unfortunately. I only interact with robots. But I have to tell you, robots are a lot easier to deal with because they don't breathe. You don't have to feed them. They don't poop. They don't have feelings. So I like robots a lot. They listen to what I do, and they pretty much behave the way I expected them to. So JPL is actually the center that launched the first satellite into space. That's the Explorer satellite, the first American satellite. But since then, we've explored pretty much everywhere. We've gone to Jupiter, to Saturn. We've gone outside the solar system. We've gone to asteroids. But the place we go to the most often is Mars, because Mars is the closest planet to us. And as it turns out, it's still hard to go to, but it's a little bit easier than the other planets. So one of the missions that I was involved with when I joined JPL is the InSight lander. So this is a picture of the InSight lander here. So it's a lander, it doesn't move. It's a little boring, but it does cool things. So it has a seismometer, and the seismometer is studying the interior of Mars, and I'll show you that in a second. And it also has a probe that's currently digging down under the surface of Mars, and we're hoping that it's going to go down about 15 feet, so the deepest we've ever gone under another planet. So the InSight lander, it launched in May of, so a little over a year and a half ago. So in May of 2018, and it landed, 2018, is that right? Yes, and then it landed on Mars last Thanksgiving. So it landed the Monday after Thanksgiving of 2018. So maybe when you were just back at school, maybe still full from turkey, we were landing a robot on Mars. And that was my first time landing a robot on Mars. And I got to be part of the team that built the instruments and accommodated them on the lander. And I also got to operate the spacecraft on Mars. One really tricky thing with operating spacecraft on Mars is that the day on Mars is actually 24 and a half hours. So it's a little bit longer than your day on Earth. So on Earth, right, if you go to school, you're going to school maybe from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., and that's fine. So you know every day you have to wake up at 6:30, brush your teeth, have your breakfast, get to work. You're there, well, get to school, and then you're there by 8, and you're there all day. And in the evening, you can make plans with your friends, right? You know you're going to be home by 4, and so on. Well, if you're working an 8 to 4 schedule on Mars, it works a little bit differently. Because the day is 24 and a half hours, it translates to a different time on Earth every day. So if I'm going to work 8 to 4 on Mars, maybe on a Monday, I start at 8 o'clock. On a Tuesday, on Earth time, I'll be starting at 8:30. And then on Wednesday, 9 o'clock, and then 9:30. But then wait a week or two later, and now I'm starting at 2 p.m. in the afternoon because my day has shifted so much to keep up with Mars time. So it's a little bit challenging that way, that I have to work sort of what we call Mars time. And I kind of had to keep 2 watches. I had to keep 2 clocks to make sure I always knew what time it was for my spacecraft So I knew when to go talk to it and go operate it on Mars. So some of the challenges of engineering that you don't really think of. But I told you a second ago that I would tell you what Insights does. So maybe in school by now you might have learned that the Earth has a core, and it has a mantle, and it has a crust. I don't know if you know this fact, but the crust on the Earth, which is the outer layer, it's the same layer as the skin on a tomato would be. So if you take a tomato and just look at the skin, that's how thick the Earth's crust is. And then everything else underneath is the mantle and the core, and it's magma, and that's how you get volcanoes and things like that. And then on Earth, we also have tectonic plates. So we know that the crust isn't just one big crust, it's pieces that move around, and that's how you end up, with earthquakes. We're familiar with those here in California, but that's also how you get mountains, for example. And we know that about Earth. We know about the interior of Earth, not because someone took Earth and cut it open. Obviously, we can't do that, but we know that because of seismometers. It's basically because we study earthquakes. We know how earthquakes propagate, and that's how we study the interior of Mars. Think of it as if you've ever done an X-ray, or if you've gone to a doctor and they've done an MRI, and you've probably seen X-rays of like your teeth when you go to the dentist. That uses waves to see inside your teeth. It's the same. We use waves to see inside the Earth. So the way that we're studying the interior of Mars with Insight is by looking at Marsquakes. We can't call them earthquakes because they're on Mars, so we call them Marsquakes. And that's how we study what the interior of Mars looks like, because we want to understand why it's different from Earth. What you might not know about Mars is Mars is about a third of the size of the Earth. It is a rocky planet, but it has the biggest volcano in the solar system. Olympus Mons is bigger than Mount Everest. Can you imagine a volcano that big? And it also has these big trenches, and it has a big canyon that if you put it over Earth, it would go from Los Angeles to New York, and it would be 3 times deeper than the Grand Canyon. If you've been to the Grand Canyon or seen pictures of the Grand Canyon, I've hiked down the Grand Canyon. I can tell you it's really deep. So imagine something that's 3 times deeper on such a small planet. So there's something really weird going on with Mars. It used to be much more active than Earth, and yet now it's pretty much dead. That's what Insight is studying there. And let me show you, I won't show you everything, but I'll show you one of the cool things I got to do as part of the mission is I got to go to the launch. So once we got the spacecraft on the rocket, I was actually only a mile away from the pad when the launch happened. However, this rocket was launched out of California. It's the first time we did an interplanetary launch out of California. And there's fog in California when you're near the ocean. So even though I was a mile away, I actually never saw the launch. I heard it and I felt it. If any of you have ever seen a rocket launch, it's really loud, but I never saw it. And this picture was taken by one of my friends here in LA. So as it turns out, sometimes you can see launches much better without being all that close to them. So I'm going to show you a quick video of what it looks like when you land. Your oh, hold on, I'm going to pause it first. So one of the hardest things of going to Mars is actually landing on Mars. So an interesting fact when you go to Mars is that the time it takes 6 months to get from Earth to Mars. But then once you're at Mars, once you hit the atmosphere of Mars, and Mars does have an atmosphere, it's just really thin. It's about 1% of the Earth's atmosphere. So it's enough to be annoying that you have to account for it, but not enough that it really helps you when you have a parachute. But the moment it takes from the moment you hit the atmosphere to getting down on the ground is about 7 minutes. And the time it takes for the signal to get from Mars to Earth is about 7 minutes also, because it's so far that even with things traveling at the speed of light, it takes 7 minutes. So you'll see here, the engineers are receiving the data in real time. And what's interesting is that once you get that first bit of data that you're about 7 minutes from the surface, the probe is actually already on Mars. Whether it's alive or dead, that's what we were trying to find out. So, I just lost my screen. So maybe, hold on 1 second.
Take your time.
There we go. Here's the video. So this was what we were doing. So once you hit the atmosphere, you can see we have this heat shield. that starts to slow us down, and everyone's kind of looking nervous, because if you imagine you've worked on this mission for maybe 5 or 6 years, and there's your 7 minutes, we call them the 7 minutes of terror. Then when we get about 5 miles from the surface, we deploy a parachute. So we got the information that the parachute was deployed, and the parachute does help us slow down. But like I said, we don't have much of an atmosphere, so it slows us down enough that eventually the crazy thing is we actually separate from our parachute. So imagine jumping from a plane and then cutting off your parachute, which is insane. But a few seconds later, I don't know if you saw, let me just go back a little bit. There's these little retro rockets there. I'm going to pause it. See these little rockets there? Those are little retro rockets that help us slow down. And that's how we slow down to get to the surface of Mars. But meanwhile, we're seeing data come down, and basically that last mile or so, we go down on those rockets, which, if you think about it like this, feels like forever. And there we are coming down on the surface of Mars. And when we come down on the surface, we're already deployed, already ready to go. And then the next thing that happens is that we deploy our solar arrays. So you'll see in a second how engineers react to landing on Mars. It's pretty funny. But it is a big event for us because, that whole team, we all work together to make those things happen. And so many things can go wrong when you land on Mars. But definitely that day so far has kind of been a highlight of my career. And we have people watching from all over. And that's one of the cool things. Actually, this year we had a 360 camera in our operations room for landing. And we'll probably do the same when we land our next mission, which I'll tell you about in a second. So there's really great ways to get involved in the missions, even when you're still in school. So let me show you just a couple pictures of some of the work I get to do as an engineer. So I work in the control room. I worked on at the pad on the rocket itself. One of the cool things when we do work with there's the InSight lander behind me. That's me right there if you can't recognize me in my white suit. But one of the things we have to do is we have to keep our spacecraft really clean. So we have to dress up in these white, what we call bunny suits when we go work with our spacecraft in the clean room. So definitely very different aspects to the same job. People often ask me, what does your job look like on a day-to-day? Well, it looks like this. It can be very, very different. So, InSight's been on Mars for almost a year now. And I wanted to show you actually really quickly before I go there. This is an example of how big a team can be. And actually, the InSight team is very small. So people often ask, what do I need to do to be an engineer? Do I need to be really good at math and physics? And I'm like, yeah, math, physics, pretty important. So is actually English and having good presentation skills, because you have to be able to communicate your ideas. But one of the most important things is actually being a good teammate and a good team player and a team worker, because all of these big missions that we do them as a team. No single human being can build a big rover, build a big spacecraft on their own. You can't do it. So usually you're working with large teams and you have to get along with everyone. So as an engineer or a scientist, if you want to do, or really anywhere, if you want to do anything cool and big, the one skill you really have to get good at is being a good friend and being a good team worker, because that's how you do the cool, complicated things. And then let me just give you a quick preview. I want to keep time for questions of the rover that I'm working on now. This is the Mars 2020 rover. It's the biggest rover we've landed. It's about a little bit bigger than the Curiosity rover. It's going to launch in July of 2020. And by the way, it's currently called Mars 2020. We'll call it a working title. There was actually a competition for students to submit essays and names. I believe the competition's closed now. And so we're actually going to be picking a name from a student entry for the rover. So that's going to be pretty exciting. Mars 2020 is not a very exciting name, so I'm hoping that some of the students out there that wrote into us have better ideas for what we should call that rover. And we're actually going to go to Mars, and so we're going to land in February of 2021. So mark your calendars now. I think it's about February 17, 2021, and I'm sure there'll be a live event for it, same for the launch. And Mars 2020 is actually going to be collecting samples on the surface of Mars that we hope one day we'll be able to bring back to Earth. And my job on 2020 is actually pretty different from what I've done before. I work on the mobility system. So if you're familiar with maybe self-driving cars, Well, our rover is self-driving. So I work on the system that helps the rover drive itself on Mars so that we don't have to tell it exactly where to go and it can figure out where to go. So yeah, that's coming up very soon. So I wanted to leave you with that, with a little bit of excitement of the next missions that are coming up. Yeah, I think let's open it up for questions to make sure that we have plenty of time.
Outstanding. Well, we have tons of time. Actually, you ended really early, which is fantastic. So let's dive in, guys. We have a bunch of classes watching on YouTube as well. So Mr. Vassos' group in Toronto, Mr. Hill's group in Keswick, Ontario, and Miss Latch's group in Minnesota. Yes, Middleton Elementary in Minnesota. So welcome in, guys. If you guys want to type in questions in the chat bar, I'll pass them on to Dr. Alibay as well. But yeah, let's dive in with our live classes. So we'll start with Miss Fraser's class. If you guys want to come up and kick us off, go for it.
We're feeling a little bit shy.
Oh.
That's okay.
Oh, I'm loving the NASA t-shirt right there.
Yeah, way to go, man.
Yeah, he said this wasn't even funny. It was like perfect timing.
Awesome.
It's actually pajama day for us.
Best class day ever.
Anybody have a question that they want to ask?
And
A compliment? Will you take a compliment?
Yeah, a compliment's great. Go for it.
I like your hair.
Oh.
Best compliment ever.
I actually got it dyed when we were landing on Mars. So a few weeks before we landed, I went to my hairdresser and I showed her the Insight logo, and so she dyed it for that. So you have to have a little bit of excitement for what you do.
Super cool. All right, you know what? We'll come back in a minute, guys. Don't worry if you're shy. We'll go through a bunch of other questions, and you guys can think of yours in a second, okay? All right. Miss Moore's class, if you guys have a question, come on up.
How much does the rover weigh?
Oh, okay. So the rover weighs, it's actually a little bit over a ton. So, and the size is actually the size of a small SUV. So if you think of like maybe your parents' car, that's how big that rover is. And actually, yeah, and it's a lot heavier than when I worked on Insight, the lander, right? That was about 700 pounds. So we were able to use retro rockets to land it. The rover actually uses a different system. I think I have a picture, maybe. Yeah, I do. Let me show you how we land it. We actually land the rover using a sky crane. So I'm just going to zoom in. So we use basically a jetpack that's attached to the rover, and that's how we land it because it's so much heavier. So imagine, kind of looks like a helicopter landing a car, but on Mars. So it's kind of crazy, and that's how we land the rovers because it's so much heavier.
Very cool. We've covered the sky crane in a bunch of our presentations. It's always thrilling when it gets brought up, and I'm really happy you shared the Insight Lander team too. It's one of the best videos ever. We can pass it along to classes at the end as well.
And one thing one thing I forgot to mention while I have people's attention, one thing that I mentioned, you can always look into what we do. I'll send along the link. There's actually a way to watch what we're doing because we're currently building the rover, and I'm part of the team that builds it. There's JPL has a live link where every day you can pretty much just tune in and see what we're doing in the clean room without being there. I'm not going to click on it now because there's actually nothing interesting going on. We have the rover is currently in a thermal vacuum chamber. So we put the rover in a Mars environment and we're testing it in that environment. So it's in a different room where we don't have a camera, but it'll be back there in about a week. So I would strongly encourage you to go look at it and see our engineers working on the rover because that's kind of cool. The link is up 24/7. And I believe there's people answering questions between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. Pacific time every day. So if you have a question, you can post it on there, and one of the engineers is going to answer it for you also.
How cool is that? So we'll be sure to share that link with all the classes when we're done and the ones watching on YouTube as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, we had Miss Ide's class join us, grade 6s in Oakville, Ontario. So if you guys want to come up and have a question, go for it. Hey, guys.
How is the...
Hey, let's let the guy ask his question, okay?
How is the rover powered?
Oh, that's a good question. So the rover actually has, we actually use plutonium. So we actually use nuclear power to power the rover. And I can show you maybe on the picture that I had, you can kind of see it. Let me show you. On this picture, you can kind of see it on the back here of the rover. So there's it has what it looks like a tail right here on the back. That's actually the plutonium source. So it's just, you can see it better here too. So it's just it's nuclear power, so it's something that decays and it forms heat, and then we use the heat to make electrical power. So on InSight, you probably saw from the images, we were using solar power. So it has these big solar arrays, basically the same as you would have on your car. Oh, sorry, not on your car, on your house, maybe on your roof, or maybe you've seen them while you were driving. So we use that power on the smaller spacecraft. With the rover, because we have to drive around and we have all of these really high-powered instruments, the solar arrays just aren't enough to collect enough energy, so we use nuclear power. And we store that energy, and we also have batteries where we store that energy when we use less energy during the night, so that we can do higher energy things during the day.
Very cool. Thank you so much. All right, let's go to Mr. Allen's class. If you guys have one, come on up.
In LA? What is the rover made out of? See, that's 10:25 a.m.
Oh, that's a good question. So a little bit of everything. So it's mostly aluminum, actually. So we use a lot of aluminum, and then we use a lot of composites. So we'll use carbon fiber composites where it's appropriate. We'll also use honeycomb structures. So we'll use the aluminum and make honeycomb structures. So it's less about the material that we use and more about the structures that we use because what we want is we want the rover to be as light as possible, but also as strong as possible to survive, many years on Mars. So it's a mix of components that we get together.
A quick follow-up. So we would understand naturally why it wants to be strong, but why do we want it to be light?
Well, so as I told you, it's not easy to land on Mars. So the lighter something is, the easier it is for us to land something, right? Because, well, you can imagine that. I don't know if any of you have ever done like the egg drops or things like that in school, where you're dropping something from a high distance and you're trying to. Egg drop was like my thing, right? When you're trying to drop something from very high and make the egg not die. If you haven't, you should try it out. It's a fun little experiment to do. But the heavier the thing that you're dropping is, the faster it's going to drop to the ground, right? So you want something pretty light. And also, one of the challenges we have is that the rocket, there's something called the rocket equation, but basically the basics of rocket science, listen up, this is all you need to know about rocket science, is that the more mass you have, the more energy it's going to take you to go to the same speed. So the heavier something is, the more what we call thrust you're going to need to get it up, right? So the heavier something is, basically what it comes down to is the more fuel you're going to need, or the bigger rocket you're going to need. And we only have rockets that are so big because we can only produce so much thrust, so that limits us in terms of how much mass. And of course, we want to be as efficient as possible. So the lower mass we are, the less fuel we have to buy, so the cheaper it is. So there's many reasons why we want to be light.
Excellent. That was a great answer. I also love that when you said the egg challenge, one kid's hand shot up faster than I've ever seen a hand go up in my entire life. So way to go. All right, I'm going to take a question from a group on YouTube really quickly. So Miss Latch's class, grade 5s, again, Middleton Elementary in Minnesota, want to ask, does the rover ever come back to Earth? And if not, what happens to it?
They don't. It's very sad. We take care of them forever. So we've had quite a few rovers go to Mars now, right? This is Mars 2020 is going to be our 5th rover. So we had one very small rover with Pathfinder, and then we had Spirit and Opportunity. You probably heard that Opportunity left us, passed away recently in a dust storm. And I say passed away because they do become like your friends. And then we have the Curiosity rover, and we'll have the Mars 2020 rover. So we don't bring them back to Earth because our goal is to have them. They are our explorers, and they send us data back via radio link. So the same way as you get information on the FM or the AM radio, we have our own radio waves that we use. And they send us all of our information and even the pictures via radio links, so they don't need to come back. I'm sure they get a little lonely out there. But what we want to do is use as much of their lifetime to explore as much as possible. However, that being said, there is something that's special with the Mars 2020 rover. So the rover itself is not coming back. However, we're collecting samples. Mars 2020 is going to collect at least 20 samples, maybe a few more. And then the goal is that we'll leave those samples on the surface of Mars and send another mission down the line, maybe in 5 to 10 years, to go pick up those samples. We would also land a rocket on Mars to launch those samples back to Earth so that we could get samples from Mars without having to send humans there just yet, because we're not quite ready to send humans there. We will hopefully in my lifetime and your lifetime. But in the meantime, that would be one way that we would bring something back. So we're not bringing the full rover back, but the hope is if everything goes well, that we'll be able to bring back a few samples for scientists of the next generation, right? It could be some of you that will be working on analyzing those samples and understanding Mars better.
Outstanding. Very cool. All right, let's go to Miss Saunders' class. Do you guys have one? Go for it.
How expensive is a rover?
Pretty expensive. So these big rovers take a little while to build. This one's been about 10 years in the making. So it's going to sound like a big number, but it costs about $2 billion to build a rover over 10 years. So what that comes down to for each, it is a part of your taxpayers' money. So your parents pay something called taxes to the government, but what it costs for you, say, the amount that it will cost your family for that rover is about the price of a pizza. It's about $6 or $7 per American. It's not even a good pizza. It's like a decent pizza. So we think that the trade of about the price of a pizza for landing a cool rover on Mars, that you get all of this data, right? Like the last rover found that there was water on Mars and it sends all these amazing pictures. We think that's kind of worth a pizza's worth of entertainment.
Absolutely. I love when the cost question gets brought up because science and research, and particularly space research, I mean, it's 4/10 of 1 penny on the dollar. So for everything that we're funding otherwise, all the astronauts, all the rovers, all the robots exploring our solar system, all for that, which is a remarkable trade-off in any possible way.
Oh, for sure. That's all of the technology fallouts that we get out of it.
It is. We get so much. It's fantastic. We've covered that in a bunch of sessions this month. It's been really great. All right, Mr. Laveau's class, last of our first round of questions. Come on up, guys.
Hi, I'm in 8th grade. So what classes do you take for like if you want to be working in that field?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's a good question. So, I mean, when you're going through high school, I mean, what I always tell people is like, sure, if you want to become an engineer or a scientist, then you have to take math and whatever AP math there is, and you have to do. I did physics, and those are the two key ones. Also, if you want to be a scientist, then like think about biology or chemistry. Those are the basic ones, but you have to really do well in every field because everything kind of plays into your discipline. But whenever people ask me, well, what should I be studying, especially when you're in 8th or 9th grade, I never want to say, go study math. What I always say is go study what you enjoy. And whatever that is, that will lead you to your path, right? So it's really hard to know even at your age, right? Like, yeah, maybe I dreamt of being an engineer when I was in 8th or 9th grade, but I didn't really know exactly where I wanted to be. I mostly dreamt of being an astronaut. But what I did is I looked at what subject I was strong at and what subjects I enjoyed doing. Because at the end of the day, whatever job you end up in, it's really demanding. I mean, when you're working on a rover, I was at work until 3 a.m. last night because we were dealing with an issue on the rover, and then I'll be going to work, late on a Friday afternoon. You have to be really passionate about what you do. So look at what you already enjoy and nurture those things. Don't let people tell you that you shouldn't be doing things because, it doesn't even matter if you're good at it or not yet. Just put your energy into the things you're passionate about, and that's going to lead to a job you're actually going to enjoy, whatever that is.
Yep. And I love that message, and it's something that's come up in all our sessions with NASA people. So if you want to be at NASA, if you want to be an engineer, by all means, math and physics are the route for you. But there's so many jobs there: business people, accountants, artists, explorers, any job you can imagine. NASA has roles that fit that bill. So
yeah.
In exploring space, so many opportunities for you.
I've yet to find anyone to give me a job that does not have a position at NASA. So
very cool. All right, let's dive back through, guys, the second round of questions. So Miss Praisner's class, I'm going to come to you guys first, and you guys can ask 2 questions because I know that you just had the comment to begin with. So come on up, and we'll take 2 from you guys.
Okay, so we have 2 questions, and they're sort of different. One is, what inspired you to work at NASA, and how long have you been there? And then the other one is, how long does the power last on your rovers?
Great question.
Oh, those very good questions. Okay, so what inspired me to work at NASA? So I mentioned a little bit that when I was younger, I really liked sci-fi movies. So well, Apollo 13 is not really a sci-fi movie. It's more of a real story, but also I was a big Star Wars fan and a big Star Trek fan. And honestly, I liked everything space related, but I didn't know that I could have a job in aerospace. So of course, maybe like many of you, I've dreamt of being an astronaut, and maybe one day I will be an astronaut. I see someone putting their hands up. Good. I mean, go for it. So, you know, I always wanted to be an astronaut. I still do. Maybe one day I will be. But I, you know, figured out that maybe being an engineer wasn't a bad backup job for being an astronaut. So, so eventually, I guess what I discovered in all of those movies is that what I enjoyed is the people that were doing the problem solving and the people that were working together. And in a way, I get to be an explorer through the eyes of my rovers, right? I get to be, when I work on these missions that go to Mars, the pictures that come down every day, they're pictures of new areas that no one has ever seen before. And I'm one of the first people on Earth to see them. I tell the rover to take the pictures and it sends them back to me before I share them with the rest of the world. So to me, that was kind of the appeal to working at NASA. And I've been there now almost 6 years. So took me a little while to get there because I did an undergraduate and a master's and a Ph.D. So I didn't start at NASA until I was 26. But I've been there almost 6 years. So it's been fun. I'm on my 3rd Mars mission in 6 years, which is pretty cool to be able to say. And then I think the second question was about how long the power lasts.
Yeah.
So for the rovers like Mars 2020 and like Curiosity that have the nuclear power, we have yet to find out when we're going to run out of power. That power is really, really efficient, and it has to do with nuclear decay, so that is very, very slow. So usually it's not the power that we run out of first. On Curiosity, the wheels have kind of been wearing down. You know, on your car, you have to get your tires changed out from time to time. Well, we don't have AAA on Mars, so we don't have mechanics to go change our wheels, our tires. So when they break down, they break down. So we're seeing some wear and tear on our wheels and things like that. So usually for those bigger rovers, that's where we expect the end of lifetime to be, and that could still be years from now. For our smaller rovers like Spirit and Opportunity, they use solar power. So the challenge there is that over time, on Mars, we get really big dust storms. So we'll get really, really dusty seasons where the rover will be covered in dust. If you see pictures of even selfies of Curiosity on Mars, you'll see it's kind of full of dirt. Not because it rolls around in dirt, it's because there's just dirt everywhere. So what happens with those rovers is eventually the solar panels get covered in dust, and then the sun can't really hit the panels anymore, and that's how they lose energy over time.
That's Tanny, great answer. Thank you so much. All right, we've got about 7 minutes and 5 more questions to do. We can do it, people. So I'm excited. So let's go to Ms. Moore's class first. And yeah, come on up for a second one, guys.
How long does it take for a rover to go out of Earth's atmosphere?
Yeah, when we're blasting the rover out of the Earth, how long does it take it to get to space and head towards its destination?
Oh, well, to get out of Earth's atmosphere, we're talking about maybe 30 to 50 minutes. Like, it's really fast because the Earth's atmosphere is only a very small part of the journey. So we get on the rocket, and within 90 minutes, actually, of launch, typically, the rover is completely separated from the rocket. So the rocket gives it like an initial boost in the right direction. And because there's no atmosphere in space, once you have that initial boost, you're going to keep moving at that distance until we try and stop it. That's another law of one of the laws of physics is we give it a big push, and imagine if there was nothing stopping you, you would just keep moving, and that's what happens. So about 90 minutes in, you're already separated from your rocket and well on your way to Mars. So leaving Earth is not the long part. The long part is going from Earth to Mars. and that takes about 6 months.
And just a really quick note, we haven't really covered this in the presentation, but the precision, the mathematical precision to actually get to Mars, the people that need to make those equations, it's unbelievable. There's really no analogy on Earth, but like try and imagine throwing a dart and hitting the bullseye from like a mile away. And that's something, I mean, remotely close to what we're doing. It's fantastic.
We get a few course corrections along the way, but yeah, that's about right.
Okay, we nudge the dart a little bit. Perfect.
Yep.
All right, Ms. Ide's class, come on up, guys.
No, but
Okay, I'm going.
everyone else in Mr. Henderson.
Oh, it's us. Hi.
Hey.
Go ahead.
How fast does the rover go?
Yeah.
How fast does it drive?
Yeah.
Surprisingly slowly. So right now, the current rover goes maybe about 10 to 20 meters an hour. It's very slow, the Curiosity rover. For the Mars 2020 rover, actually, my team is the one that's developing that system, and we're going a little bit faster. We're going about 100 meters an hour, which is still very slow. 100 meters is like not even 0.1 mile. It's a little bit less than that. Well, you're looking at 300 feet, I guess, is what it is. So it's a very slow crawl, but the reason why we're that slow is because on Mars, we don't have GPS and we don't have any knowledge of where we're going. So the rover, every time it moves 3 feet, it has to make a new map, figure out where the obstacles are, and then it moves another 3 feet, takes images as it moves and so on. So we try and move slowly because also if we run into anything, that's it. The mission's over, right? Like we can't crash on Mars. So we go slowly and take our time. And that way we can also take images and do science at the same time.
Very cool. All right. Mr. Allen's class, come on back up, guys. Go for it.
Why don't you guys like go on Mars yourself instead of sending the rovers on there? Because don't you think if you go yourself, you'll collect more information?
Great question.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So eventually we do want to send humans to Mars. And the reason why we're sending the robots now, in addition to being able to do science earlier on, is as a precursor. The reason why we don't send humans just yet is because we don't really know all that much about Mars. We haven't landed there all that many times. We don't know what the weather's like or the environment's like. And it's actually, I kind of mentioned earlier, it's a little bit hard to deal with humans. When we send humans to Mars, imagine if it would take you 6 months to get there. You have to bring all the food and the oxygen with you, land on the surface of Mars. Once you're there, you have to stay there 2 years for the planets to align again. And then it takes you another 6 months to come back. So yeah, you're committing to a 3-year journey to a planet that no one has ever been to before. So we have to prepare for that really well. Also, there's no houses on Mars. It's not like when you go to the moon where it's a 3-day journey and then you stay there a few hours and come back. It's a really long journey. So technology speaking, we're not quite there yet. We still have to figure out, we've never launched a rocket from Mars. How would you come back without a rocket? There's just open questions that our rovers are actually helping us answer. One of the cool things with Mars 2020, it has an instrument called MOXIE. And MOXIE is actually taking oxygen from the Mars atmosphere and making oxygen that eventually a human could use. So we're demonstrating that we can use the local atmosphere and make oxygen. So that was one less thing that we'd have to send to Mars if we were sending humans. So definitely I agree that we could get a lot more done if we had humans on the ground because they're smarter and they can make their own decision and they can move at faster than 300 feet an hour. But for now, we have to study the environment and get ourselves ready for that.
On a plus note, it means that students in these classrooms might be the people who get to go to Mars. So that's very exciting. So
absolutely, yeah.
We're doing all this prep so that you guys can go there, which is fantastic. All right, our last 2 questions. So Ms. Saunders' class, come on up for one. Go for it, guys.
Do you want to learn from the samples on Mars?
What do we want to learn? You know what? We want to learn what we don't know. It's kind of always what we say. So there's multiple things we want to learn. We want to learn about different types of rocks on Mars, how they were formed. Maybe we want to look for organic compounds that might be the building blocks for life. But one of the things that's a challenge when you go to Mars and we send a rover, we send a chemistry kit with the rover when we go to Mars, and it analyzes the samples. But there's only so many chemistry, so big of a chemistry kit we can send. So by bringing samples back that come from different areas, that opens up any type of university or student to propose experiments that they can do with those samples and learn from their own field of research. So really there's things we can learn about biology, chemistry, geology, planetary science and evolution of planets, all of these things. And it's a lot easier when we can bring those back to Earth and use all of our different chemistry kits to look at those questions from different sides. So what I'm most excited about is to learn about the things we never thought we'd learn about.
Very cool. All right. And with that, one last question for Mr. Levog's class. Come on up, guys. Thanks for your patience.
Do you think there's life on Mars?
Do I think there's life on Mars? Well, that's a very good question. It's actually one of the things we're trying to answer. NASA's actually looking for life in the solar system as a whole. We're pretty sure that there's most likely no life on the surface of Mars anymore, but that could have been in the past. Mars actually used to have liquid water. It used to have an atmosphere the way Earth did. It used to have a magnetic field. So that's actually one of the things that InSight has gone there to figure out is what happened to Mars and why is it not like Earth anymore? And missions like Mars 2020 are going to look at maybe evidence for life that used to be on Mars. But one really cool thing that happened recently, right, is that we found underground water on Mars, and that may be liquid water. And we know on Earth, right, when there's liquid water, usually there's life near water. So there might be, I mean, we're not talking about green aliens here. We're talking about small bacteria and very small things, but it is possible that at least there could have been life on Mars. And maybe, just maybe, they might still be there.
Very cool. Well, that's something that you guys as astronauts can go find out when you get there.
Yeah.
Dr. Alibay, so before we wrap up, this has been fantastic. I'm going to pass along all the resources you mentioned to all our kids when we're done. But is there any last message you guys want to share about what they can do to learn more about space, how they can get engaged and involved and excited?
Yeah, well, so two things and one thing I always say is follow your passion and don't let anyone say no, because if I'd listened to people who told me no along the way, I would not be here today. And I can tell you there's always obstacles along the way, but just remember, it's always worth going for your goals, and it's okay to dream. It's always okay to dream, and you should always go for those dreams. And then the other is, if you want to learn more about NASA, use the online resources, right? Like we obviously have a big online presence. I use Instagram a lot, but also if you go to jpl.nasa.gov or mars.nasa.gov, those are two very good, and obviously just nasa.gov. Those are all great resources. There's always competitions ongoing. I would really recommend following them on social media because they will inform you of different competitions that might be ongoing. There's a lot of resources, experiments, and then once you, maybe in a few years when you get old enough, look at going to space camp or coming to NASA for an internship. That's really the way to learn how we do things. So.
Outstanding. Well, thank you so much. What we do at the end of every session, Dr. Alibay, is I'm going to demute every class's microphone. And so boys and girls, if you guys could get ready to join me in saying a huge thank you for the presentation today. Everyone is now demuted. Go for it.
Thank you.
Awesome, guys.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you guys so much for joining in today. This was fantastic. And yes, so we're going to send those resources. Check for that email in just a minute. And thanks for joining us during our fantastic Space Month, where we got to feature so many fantastic people like Dr. Alibay. Thank you so much for joining us, Farah.
Thank you.
All right.